is only as happy as their least happy child. And so there is no fabulous life if your children are breaking down. And that's what families are learning, is that, all of that freedom and all that fabulous me time comes at a cost if you have children.
So one would say then, well, I just won't have children then.
And that would be fine. And so there are a lot of people that are saying today, I don't see the value in being responsible for another human being, and what they're missing out on is the deep and rewarding emotional connection to your children. It's a love like no other love. But if you've had trauma as a child, if you've had parents who were narcissistic or resented parenting, or were distracted or mentally ill, you may already have had that trauma that implies that later it's harder to connect, right? So those attachment disorders that I was referring to earlier. There's 3 kinds of attachment disorders. There's the avoidant attachment disorder. So what does that mean? So a healthy attachment looks like this. When you return home, your child feels so securely attached to you. You've gone out for an hour or 2 for dinner with your spouse. You come home and your baby is happy to see you, and the reunion, what we call the reunion, is a beautiful reunion. The baby is joyful and happy, and that's healthy attachment. It means that you've made your baby feel so safe and secure because you are there primarily and have prioritized them the majority of the time as the primary attachment figure, that when you come home, your baby welcomes it. But what we're seeing is more and more children developing attachment disorders because their parents are pushing the limits of how much they can leave those babies and putting them in things like institutional care and leaving them for long hours at a time and traveling for their fabulous careers and their fabulous lives at ages when babies really can't tolerate that kind of separation. When the primary attachment figure, usually the mother, comes home, and the baby turns away from you and turns toward the babysitter, or just turns away, that baby has the beginning of what's called an avoidant attachment disorder. Now that's correlated later on with things like depression and difficulty forming attachments later on. The next kind of attachment disorder is called an ambivalent attachment disorder, and the mother then comes home and the baby clings to the mother for dear life because the internal voice in that baby is, my mom is going to leave me again, so I have to hold on to her. Now that baby is fractious and can't be soothed and will not let go of that mother, holding on for dear life. What I call like the rhesus monkeys did to the wire cages, right? And that's correlated later on with anxiety in youth. The disorganized attachment disorder is different than the other 2 in that the other 2 have a strategy. So think of an attachment disorder as a strategy. A child who's left for too many hours by their parent, or whose parent is physically present but emotionally checked out. That baby has to cope, has to have a strategy. Turning away from the mother is a strategy. And the internal narrative is, my mommy isn't present for me, isn't here for me, won't be there for me, I can't trust my environment. And that baby says, and I'm gonna have to cope on my own, what we call learned helplessness. The ambivalent attachment disorder, that baby is, the strategy is, I'm gonna hold on, because if I don't hold on, she's gonna leave again. Disorganized attachment disorder is the hardest to treat because the baby has no strategy. So the baby cycles through many strategies. The baby will go from clinging to avoiding to being enraged and even slapping or hitting the mother and then cycling through again. And that baby that develops a disorganized attachment disorder, those babies, it's correlated later with borderline personality disorder. And we're seeing a huge rise in borderline personality disorders. And those are the kids who are cutting themselves, who are trying to commit suicide. We have a mental illness crisis, the likes of which we've never seen in history. And it has everything to do with how we're raising our children.
You seem pissed off under that comment, Delaney.
Pissed off? Yes, I suppose I am. I'm not pissed off at the people. I'm pissed off at a society that is lying. We're not really educating or telling parents the truth.
So there's 4 attachment disorders. Avoidant, secure, ambivalent, disorganized.
Well, one, secure isn't a disorder. So
Okay,
there's
secure
secure, and
is
then
a
there's
sign.
3 attachment disorders.
Avoidant, ambivalent, disorganized.
Yes.
How does that manifest when you're an adult? So how would I know, because I can relate to some of these, and I'm wondering how that would then manifest in my relationships or my life as an adult, outside of the obvious mental health situations.
So an avoidant attachment disorder would be someone who can't form meaningful and deep connections, can't commit, has difficulty committing, has difficulty trusting in the intimacy and the depth of intimacy in a relationship. An ambivalent attachment disorder would be someone who's highly anxious, someone who clings to you, calls you, maybe a woman you dated in the past who called you 5 times a day to check on you and was worried that you'd be the little fish that swam away, and they suffocate the people they love because they're afraid to let go. Disorganized attachment, borderline personality disorders, they tend to be very emotionally volatile. There's a lot of anger there, and there's a lot of self-harming behavior there.
Do they end up attracting a certain attachment style? So if I'm an avoidant, do I then end up attracting avoidance, or is there any research on that, on how we then date? I'm guessing secures go for secures.
Yeah, secures, well, if you're healthy, you're attracted to reciprocally healthy relationships, and you trust your environment, so you trust in loving relationships. And avoidance, sometimes you're attracted to avoidant people because there's no conflict there. So in other words, someone who can't commit with someone also who can't commit. That can break down those at some point. So remember that these are pathological defenses. So we use the word defense because it means to protect one, right? And defenses help us until they no longer help us. And so we say attachment disorders are pathological defenses, meaning they don't usually last a lifetime. They break down at some point. And so you might be with another avoidant attachment disordered person, but at some point one of you breaks down and then realizes that you need the other, and then then you're in a relationship with someone who can't give back. So yeah, as we say, like levels of water meet. So people will be attracted to one another often of the same ilk, but it isn't necessarily a healthy relationship.
And of all these 4 attachment styles, who do you think, which attachment style, in your opinion and from your observations and the people that you've seen, is most likely to have a successful and then also unsuccessful relationship?
Oh, well, secure attachment will have a successful, people with secure attachment will be drawn to healthy, reciprocal, loving, deep connections because they've had a deep and loving connection with their mother. So remember I said that it's only after 3 years of age that you internalize the feeling of security. And where you internalize the feeling that the world is a safe place and you can trust the people in it and you can trust to love another person. And so, we throw that word trust around, but we don't realize that it comes from the very beginnings of our development. When we don't trust others, it's generally because we couldn't trust those that we were to depend upon when we were at our most vulnerable stage.
And what about the alternative? So which of these attachment styles is least likely to have successful relationships?
That's disorganized,
okay.
Yeah. They have a very hard time forming relationships, holding on to relationships. I would say they're the most complicated to treat, and they're also the most complicated in terms of being able to have successful relationships in the future.
I was wondering as you were speaking whether if I have more kids, so if I have 10 young kids,
Yeah.
is there a higher probability of neglect in those kids? Because if I'm a mother, I just don't have time for all of these kids at the same time? They can't all be on my chest at the same time.
Yeah, it's a good question. Well, there's something in the developing world called maternal depletion syndrome, which is that mothers can actually die in the developing world of having too many children in too short a period of time. They get depleted physically, but they also get depleted emotionally. I'm going to say it right now so everybody can hear it who's watching this. Having children is stressful. It is frustrating. It does require that you are sleepless for the first 5 years. It requires that you can tolerate a lot of discomfort and frustration. So if there was a job description, first it would say the most joyful, enriching thing you can do in your entire life. But what comes with that to foster healthy development is frustration, lack of sleep, stress, discomfort. And so that should be part of the job description.
Yeah, it seems to be such an important